This came up yesterday. And look, I think that it is important. I mentioned this as it relates to Chris Johnson last week. I mentioned it as it relates to Marshawn Nealand and the determination that he had stage 1, the lowest of 4 levels of CTE. Nealand, as you may recall, died by suicide in November of 2025. Family donated the brain for research by Boston University's experts. Study came out yesterday. And it's similar to a study that emerged in 2021 regarding the risk of developing ALS. That was something I mentioned last week. I noticed some of the same doctors involved in both studies, and it's roughly the same number of participants, 19,000 and change players who were studied who played at least one game in the NFL from 1960 through 2019. So it's basically the same group. From 5 years ago, the finding was that the risk of developing ALS is 4 times greater for anyone who's played in the NFL at least one game from 1960 through 2019 than it is for the general population. Yesterday's study, very different. Yesterday's study looks at the mortality risk, the death risk from neurodegenerative disease for anyone who played at least one NFL game from 1960 through 2019. And it's somewhere between 3 and 4 times greater, which isn't surprising to those of us who have been following for the past, it's 17 years now. The NFL's epiphany about concussions was forced upon it in October of 2009 when both the commissioner and then NFL PA Executive Director DeMaurice Smith were called to Congress for a hearing, and the message was clear. You got a problem. You better clean it up or we're going to clean it up for you. And that's when they embarked on the effort to clean it up by taking the blows to the head to the extent to which we used to see them out of the game. And there have been many changes. It's been very slow. But if you go back and watch, and there's plenty of old games on YouTube from the 80s and the 90s, a very different game. Very different game. The level of physicality, the guys getting blown up across the middle when they catch a pass, blows to the head, hits with the helmet. They've done what they can to change it. There's only so much you can do. But we are at the point now, 17 years later, where those of us who follow it carefully realize that there is a connection between not just concussions, but what they call subconcussive trauma, where you're just coming off the line. And if you're an offensive lineman, your helmet crashes into the helmet of a defensive player. For both guys, they may not suffer a concussion, and the vast majority of the time they don't. But it's that blow to the head that doesn't concuss the brain, but they accumulate over time. And it resulted in this finding. And in comparison to the general population, it is stunning. And here's another thing that makes it even more dramatic. This is a point that was made in the summary of the research that was sent out yesterday. The mortality rate for NFL players, when you take in all causes, is lower than the general population. And they've realized that, and I'm going to keep this very, very simple because it's the limit of my ability to explain it and understand it. But basically, the thing that makes them elite athletes, they are elite physical specimens. They take care of themselves. The things that people who don't have the genetics, the work ethic, the work product of years and years and years of constantly doing what you can to take care of your body, those folks are going to, as they get older, they're going to die of the things that the foundation for which are laid when you're young and you're not working out and taking care of yourself the way that professional athletes do. So for all causes, the death rate is lower. And as they point out in the summary of the research effort, it makes this spike for mortality arising from neurogenerative diseases like ALS, Parkinson's, dementia, et cetera, it makes it even more alarming because for all other reasons, football players are a lot healthier and they live longer. But in this one area, the death rate 4 times higher. And I went back and forth with some people yesterday about this because, look, my position is we now know the risks, and we need to make sure that the players who are signing up to play now know the risks. And I'll agree, I'll stipulate, as the lawyers would say, that there are plenty of guys who have played in recent years who weren't told the full range of the risks. So they weren't able to make the same kind of clear-eyed decision that players nowadays can make. And that's unfortunate because the first decision that's made is just to play football at all. And the parents are involved in that. And there was a time, 2012, 2013, where the participation rate in youth football began to dramatically decrease. High school teams were shrinking. That's changed to a certain extent. And the NFL pays close attention to that because your supply of future NFL players is driven by how many are playing. It's just like I was saying yesterday about soccer. You got to have enough people playing so that the best will emerge and be tested against good competition and gradually get better and better and better. And by the time they finish their college careers, they're a completed product ready to compete and make the roster and contribute at a high level to an NFL team. So I just think it's fair for everybody to know the risks. I'm not here to throw stones at the failure of the NFL, college football, anyone, to point out all the risks in years past. Was there a time where the NFL covered up the risks? Yes, that's documented. They downplayed the risks. And the NFLPA had a seat at the table. That was one of the big problems I had with the League of Denial book. And I have a copy of it because I wanted to see, do they ever mention when the NFL set up in 1994 the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, which basically became the mechanism for downplaying the risks of head trauma? The NFLPA always had a seat at the table. And the NFLPA is the players. Now, of course, the players don't ultimately run it. They're not sitting at the very top, but the NFLPA had a seat at the table. And that was something that was glossed over completely in the initial effort to point out the NFL's failures when it comes to being transparent and honest about the risk of head trauma. And even if they had been, the vast majority of guys who played would have still played. I think it's more of a PR thing. And at its core, I think underlying everything is this fear that the pool of players is going to shrink. And I've seen it argued that, well, it really doesn't matter if the pool shrinks because it's only a small percentage that makes it to the NFL. But that overlooks the reality of how this works. You need to have that pool in order to ensure that the guys who occupy the small percentage are in that pool and not playing baseball or basketball or soccer. So I think it's important to point it out. And let me point out one more thing before I move on. I saw something on Awful Announcing yesterday. Don Van Natta Jr., who is one of the traditional journalists employed by ESPN. He recently got a new contract, and he was saying somewhere that this shows ESPN's commitment to journalism. And that's fine, but I think that with the NFL now owning 10% of ESPN, the focus shouldn't be the macro. Do they still have traditional journalists on staff? Are they still doing traditional journalism that may reflect poorly on the NFL or any of its teams? The macro, it would be too obvious if that went away. The micro is what we need to look at. I've mentioned before that there was an unflattering report about the circumstances surrounding the off-field issues involving James Pierce Jr. of the Falcons, and ESPN posted that right as the floodgates were opening for free agency. It just disappeared. It just was lost. So yeah, they did the work. They engaged in the journalism, but it was published at a time where no one was going to notice it. The one lengthy article that I can remember about the whole Mike Vrabel, Diana Rossini thing, it was published late on a Friday afternoon. And it didn't come with the car wash we used to see, where the person would publish the article and then you'd see the author on this show, this show, this show, this show. And they used to be very strategic in the timing of when they would drop these stories. I think that's one thing that we need to watch. We need to watch the little things. When these stories emerge, where, when, and how aggressively are those stories marketed? Is it just a box that's being checked so no one will say, well, they've stopped engaging in journalism? It's not whether or not they are, but how they're packaging it, how they're marketing it, where they're putting it, when they're putting it. And I mention all that because I don't see anything. As of the last time I checked on ESPN about this study that came out yesterday, not a word. Now, they had a story about the Marshawn Kneeland CTE diagnosis posthumously. They've had things pre-merger with NFL about issues of this nature. I'm going to give them a few more hours. I'm probably going to write something about it at PFT, but this is one of the little things. Yeah, they still have journalists. Yeah, and every once in a while there's going to be a big splash article. But it's fair to watch the little things, because the league owns 10% of it now, 10% of the whole operation. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.